Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
Welcome back to another episode of Medicine Redefined. We have a special repeat guest today, Meagan Landress. You guys might remember Meagan from Student Loan Planner a few months ago when we took a deep dive into PSLF and student loans in general. And with the state of current affairs with student loans and all the mobility, particularly the recent forgiveness plan by the Biden administration, I wanted to get Meagan back on here to get her take and help us dissect really what this plan is all about, as well as touch on a couple of other important topics that we did not get to address last time. So in this show, we talk about the PSLF, or the loan forgiveness proposed by the Biden administration at the end of August. We talk about the Biden's new IDR plan and what that might mean for borrowers. We also talk about the legal implications and the trajectory of student loan forgiveness, the future plans proposed by both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. We shift gears to talk about the loan repayment strategies for the non-PSLF pursuer, and we also revisit some risk mitigation strategies and tactics that some of the listeners sent questions in for. So the last episode was quite popular and we had a lot of great feedback. So some of those questions will be addressed in this episode as well. And then we spend a good amount of time talking about building wealth. You may recall that Meagan started off as a financial coach. In fact, she's still a financial coach. And it wasn't until she realized that student loans were a critical component of every single individual's financial burden is when she started paying attention more to getting the CSLP designation, which is a student loan planner, a certified student loan planner. And so I wanted to get her take on what it means to build wealth in the context of having student loans, particularly because many of the medical professionals and healthcare professionals embark on this journey of building wealth much later than our non-medical counterparts do. We ended off with talking about the role of higher education, particularly the cost of higher education, which continues to increase year by year and is clearly putting an undue burden on the system in itself, but also on the individual, which is contributing to burnout and poor financial and mental health, and ultimately the root cause of a lot of the problems and warrants discussion today. So without further delay, please enjoy this repeat discussion with Meagan Landress.
All right, Meagan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Lots to talk about today.
Oh yeah, and I was actually thinking about this before we got started. You're our first repeat guest, like officially, and backed by popular demand. The last discussion that we had was interesting and it was informative for me, but also got a lot of great feedback from listeners as we talked about. Mm-hmm. And there are some follow-up questions, so we'll throw that in there. But I want to get right into it, right? There's just been so much movement. And so we're recording this at the end of September. I think it was August 24th. There was this big announcement by the Biden administration about everything that's going to happen with loan forgiveness. So let's go right into it. Like, how did that come about? I mean, obviously you guys saw this coming probably from a mile away, but for those of us who don't have a pulse on it as much, what were the steps that put this into play, and is it here to stay, which we'll talk about later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, gosh, I mean, Biden had campaigned on the fact that he was going to cancel student loan debt. And so it was constantly something that kept coming back up as, can we do it? Is he allowed to do it? And, all the politics that go into it. So he's using his executive authority under the kind of the COVID umbrella, I guess you could say. That's what we're using right now to allow, or I say we, that's what he is using right now to allow for this cancellation to be, to come forth. From what we understand, it sounds like it's going to be rolling out where the application will be available in October. Do you want me to do a kind of a recap of what it is, though?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, people say, oh, up to 20,000, but maybe 10,000. So like who does 20,000 apply to, 10,000, that kind of stuff?
Yes. So, first and foremost, there's an income limitation to this. So, if you are a single person or if you're married filing separately from your spouse, then your income has to be less than 125,000 for either 2020 or 2021's tax year. So, that was at first not known. Like, we thought that they might be going off of the most recently filed tax return, but they're saying 2020 or 2021. So that's cool because I think that opens the door for people who may have made less in 2020. So that's for a single person or filing married separately. For joint, it's 250,000, or if you're a household married filing taxes jointly, has to be less than 250,000. And this is only relevant to Department of Ed held loans, so federal loans. You could get up to 20,000 of loan cancellation if you ever had a Pell Grant awarded to you during your schooling. And you could know this pretty quickly by logging into your studentaid.gov account. There will be two numbers. If you had a Pell Grant at some point, you'll see your balance and you'll see grants. And if you see grants, that tells you that you've at some point gotten a Pell Grant. So that would give you the 20,000 of loan cancellation. If you didn't have a Pell Grant, you would get 10,000. And the application for this is coming out in early October. So coming up, probably right as this comes out.
Of course. And then naturally, some people are going to ask, well, what if I had Pell Grants and then I ended up paying them off because it was a large amount? Will I get some type of refund?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, in Pell Grants, I think Pell Grants are getting confused with Perkins loans. So a Pell Grant is just a grant of money that you don't have to pay back. It helped reduce the cost of your schooling. If you have Perkins loans, they are eligible for this as well, but the priority order of where the money goes is first it's going to go to your direct loans. But if you did, let's say you paid off your balance completely in full already, with the Department of Education, you can ask for a refund at this point. Anyone can ask for a refund of any payments that they've made since March 13th of 2020. You can get that money back. You probably can't ask for just $10,000 back or $20,000 back. They'll probably give you everything that you paid back, which is fine because you can then just take whatever's left and pay the rest of it off. But that's a way that you can take advantage of the 10 or the 20,000 if you've already paid loans off. If you've paid below the threshold, so let's say your balance was at like 12,000, you paid 3,000 recently, so it's down at 9,000, and you're supposed to get the 10,000 of cancellation. Well, they'll forgive the 9,000 that's left over, and they will refund you automatically the 1,000 to get you up to the 10, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And what's cool about that, I think, the piece that sticks out is the 2020, 2021 year, right? I mean, obviously those years, I think a lot of healthcare workers had their hours truncated or some were even laid off, and so they weren't able to make what they usually would under normal circumstances and might not qualify for that income threshold. So I guess that's cool about that. But that wasn't the only thing that the Biden administration put out, right? They put out this new proposition of an IDR plan. And this is what's particularly exciting for me because, as you can imagine, and you guys have talked about, for those of us who have just really large burdens, and again, selfishly, I'm going for PSLF, so I'm like, okay, well, all right, great, 10,000 doesn't even matter. It's going to get forgiven anyway.
Right.
So the second part, this is what kind of excites me, and I really hope it gets put into place. But so, can you talk a little bit about the IDR plan?
Yes, so they did propose a new IDR plan, and I want to preface this by saying it is still a proposal. I try to stay pretty pessimistic about things, and y'all may have asked me about this with forgiveness last time. You're like, do you think it's going to happen? And I probably said no, and here we are. So
no, so actually, well, what's interesting is I'm surprised to hear you say that because last time we talked about how it's just. Okay, these were your words. It's woven into the fabric, right? It's the MPN note, and it's there to say, well, we talked about the headlines are 97%, and how that's just ridiculous and just not understanding it. So I'm surprised to hear you say that you're pessimistic about this part.
Yeah, well, yeah, PSLF is definitely woven into the fabric for sure. I meant more so like widespread forgiveness. I think I was a little skeptical like back then. So yeah, this cancellation, the 10 or the 20,000, is for anybody, and we weren't sure if it was going to happen, but the IDR, the new IDR proposal, so it is exciting because it can reduce potentially what income-driven repayment is for everyone, meaning it just reduces the payment slightly for a couple reasons. It increases the poverty line. So how it's proposed, it increases the poverty line deduction that goes into how they calculate the income-driven payment. So that means, you're getting a larger deduction off of your discretionary income, or to create your discretionary income, and it's allowing for undergraduate loans to be at 5% instead of 10% of discretionary income. And most folks who have gone to, well, I won't say most, but there are folks who have borrowed for both undergrad and graduate school. And if you have some undergraduate loans, they're not going to be a large portion of your balance, but there will be a portion that will be charged then at 5% of your discretionary income instead of 10. So both of those things could make the payment much smaller than what it is right now, at the 10% for really anybody. Graduate or undergraduate loans are not, because of the poverty line deduction being increased. So that's good, because that can help people get to loan forgiveness more efficiently, just paying less, which is always the goal when you're going towards forgiveness. The other thing that they're doing, which is not related to public service loan forgiveness, but what they had proposed was shortening the longer term forgiveness timeline. So if you're not doing PSLF, you could still go towards IDR's forgiveness after 20 or 25 years. But for the 20 years, as the rules stand now, you have to be eligible for pay. And some people aren't eligible for pay because they borrowed before 2007. So this new proposal is saying that no matter what, anybody could have loan forgiveness on this plan after 20 years. So it could shorten the timeline for folks, reduce the payment for folks as well, which helps make forgiveness look more and more attractive to more and more people, which is good. So that's in a nutshell what they're proposing.
Yeah, no, that's a good overview. So I think, last time we talked a little bit about how to calculate discretionary income. Mm-hmm. Could we just use some loose numbers to just demonstrate? So last time it was what? It's 175%, now 225%. Is that what it is?
It's the poverty line? The poverty line right now is 150% of the poverty line deduction. And the poverty line, you can Google this. It changes every year. But right now, if you're a household size of 1, that poverty line deduction is about $20,000. And so if you make $100,000, you get that poverty line deduction of 20. Your discretionary income is $80,000, and that's what the payment is based off of. So that's what I mean by discretionary income.
Right. So, but it's going to be increased from 150 to 225%.
Oh yes, yeah, to 225.
Now, the other thing that I've been listening to Travis, of course. I'm an avid listener of the podcast, and Travis has kind of been talking a little bit about. And as you mentioned earlier, like this is a proposition, and I think what the expectation is that the opposition, right, the Republican Party, is really going to push back, and they actually have started pushing back. We're going to talk in a moment. I heard Travis talking about the bill that they proposed, the REAL Act. But what are the potential legal implications of this, if any?
Yeah. So, well, I think the most immediate legal implications are going to be for this cancellation that's coming out. And there's already been a pretty serious lawsuit that we're watching closely, because I think it makes a good point. So what the lawsuit is saying right now for the cancellation, it is someone who is pursuing PSLF. So the 10,000 of cancellation, 20,000 of cancellation, not super helpful, because your payments are based off of income, not the balance. And, you get 10,000 knocked off, whatever, you get less forgiven later, but nothing changes with what you pay. The taxability of cancellation varies. There are certain states, only 5 states right now, that have not conformed to the federal definition or the federal guidance on how they're going to be taxing student loan forgiveness between now and 2026. So that means there are certain states, California is one of them, it's the biggest one, that would tax this 10,000 or 20,000 of cancellation. So this person's argument, or this lawsuit's argument, is it's harming people, because this person doesn't need the 10 or 20,000 because they're going towards public service loan forgiveness. They they can't really opt out of it if they're automatically going to get it, because some people are automatically going to get the cancellation since their income is on file, which most people for PSLF would have their income on file because they're on an income-driven plan. So this person would get it hypothetically, automatically, not being able to opt out, and then they would have to pay taxes on this. So, a couple $100 to a couple thousand, they might have to pay taxes on. Mm-hmm.
But so a lot of people though haven't, at least shouldn't have recertified in the last maybe 2 years. Mm-hmm. Will that still be the case? Because the updated income isn't registered, right?
Right. So that's also the mechanics of this, like the argument. I could also argue against saying, well, how would they have your income if you haven't updated, mm-hmm. But if this person, or if someone recently, got into public service loan forgiveness, they, applied because we thought payments were going to kick in last year just to get set up, then their income would be, and they would be harmed in that way. So I get the argument. I think that could be solved by maybe an opt-out option, but so that's the most immediate challenge, is just it's going to cause harm to certain folks, which some folks.
Yeah, you're asking a lot there of the Department of Ed, though. At that point,
yes,
putting an opt-out option.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's and then there's there's also the question as to, does Biden have the authority to make that call? And it's under this COVID umbrella. And if on one side he's saying, hey, we're out of it, like everything's fine, but on the other side he's saying, but we're using it for XYZ, like that there's some contradiction there on, are we still affected by COVID and in this pandemic mind or not, so that's also a question.
Oh God. Yeah. This is the never ending pandemic. And it really, it really depends on, of course, in the healthcare setting, different rules, different masking mandates, mm-hmm. Different discussion, different time. But what's your sense, though, like in terms of a timeline? You mentioned earlier, if I understood correctly, that October, for those who aren't automatically enrolled and can't opt out, you have to apply, right? I think early October, I might have seen on the website, or later October, sometime in that time, mm-hmm. If people apply and then get approved, can that be taken back? Like, what's the timeline of this lawsuit? Like, when it will be solidified and here to stay?
Yeah, so the application is said to come out early October. It would be on studentaid.gov, and we are at this point recommending, if you want this, apply for it immediately. Like, get in there, treat it as a first come, first served kind of thing. If you do apply by November 15th, the cancellation is said to be done by the end of the year. Okay. What could happen is there could be something, this case, or there could be some kind of injunction that's filed that pauses everything, that makes this freeze. So the question is, well, if the people who have already applied, like what happens to them? I think it's the opinion that it'll probably just freeze everything, where no one's getting anything canceled quite yet, but that would also be reason for them to pause payments again, or to extend payments further. Yeah. So if that happens, I think people aren't going to be harmed in that way, in the sense that, they were counting on that to come through, because they'll just pause payments for longer and have the 0% interest for longer, which, there are certain parties that don't want that. So it's like a balancing act. It's like, what do we want to happen coming up, and what's the result of that?
So, not to put you on the spot, but what's your gut say? Do you feel like we're going to be in that frozen limbo period one more time? Which I wouldn't mind, to be honest with you, more extension of my payments, $0 payments, but
I know.
Or do you think it'll go through?
My gut says it's going to go through. I think it's going to go through, but I could completely be wrong. And then, the plan B would be, if they were to pause everything, or like freeze everything up where no cancellation was issued, I definitely think that they would extend things again. And, we'll just be in this limbo for longer.
So obviously this is dynamic, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And very controversial, depending on which side of the aisle that you're sitting on, or really anywhere. But, and you mentioned that you're somewhat pessimistic for just general loan forgiveness. So I kind of want to get a sense of like just the future of loan forgiveness, right? We talked about the Republican Party putting out this new bill called the REAL Act, The Democrats have kind of put I guess it's the loan. I forget what the full thing stands for. What can you say about that? These new bills that are being proposed into Congress.
So I think the new income driven plan, so that I think it hasn't sparked anything because there's always been new proposals coming in and across, Congress, for discussion. They've been talking about the tax implication for the longer term forgiveness forever. So there's been a lot of proposals. There always has been. But the new IDR waiver was meant to simplify things, or that was what everyone wanted for a long time. They wanted just to simplify the student loan system. Well, the new proposed plan doesn't seem like it's going to simplify anything. It almost seems like it's going to make things, it might make it more simple in the sense of, that might be the cheapest plan just for just about anybody, but it doesn't make it simple on how they calculate things or who should then be considering forgiveness versus a payoff approach. It just adds another layer, especially if they don't take certain plans away, which may not be a good thing to do. So all that to say, I think this is sparking a lot of conversation about the future of student loans and the future of what should be happening in the student loan repayment side of things. And we'll have more to come on this. I think that'll be a big topic. So I think that's something to come back to in the future. Hey, maybe I'll be your third time guest in the future. Just kidding. I won't invite myself.
It's probably going to be necessary. So I'm glad that you've already volunteered for that. I can hold you to that. So yeah, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the PSLF because I feel like we did the bulk of the conversation last time was about that. But I did mention there were some follow-up questions, so I want to take this time to kind of ask that.
Yeah.
Some of these were from my closest friends in training who just happen to be brilliant physicians, and they're financially savvy people too. Unlike majority of the physicians, I can take that shot. I am one. And one of them comes from a close friend who asked that, what happens if someone, let me back up. So last time we talked about one of the core requirements to qualify for loan forgiveness is the consolidation process, right? If your loans are like with Mohila, now Mohila's not a good example, but Nelnet or somebody, and you had to get them at the time to Fed loans, right? Now Mohila. But what happens if somebody coming out of medical school, going through 4 or 5 years, never actually consolidated, but finished a grace period, started making repayments through that time? Are those payments still being counted? Like, what's the process for that?
So short answer is yes. Now, consolidation, I think, is ideal right after you graduate because it really just simplifies your loan situation, bundles all of your loans into a direct consolidation loan, makes sure that all loans are eligible because for PSLF, we have to have direct loans. And this is less common now, but if you have some older loans that are from 2010 and before, called FFEL loans or Family Federal Education Loans, those have never been eligible for PSLF up until the PSLF waiver, which that's the environment we're in right now that expires October 31st. This is where people can consolidate now to now go back and get credit for those payments. That's not going to be possible after October 31st. But if someone already had direct loans, they just had 12 different direct loans from their schooling, and they've been making payments on them since they exited their grace period, then yes, those can definitely still count towards PSLF. They would just need to submit an employment certification form. And if you have the wrong types of loans, you have until October 31st to consolidate to make sure that you get credit for those prior payments.
And that's the case even if it's not with Fed loans, if it was somebody else?
Yes. So let's say your direct loans are all with Nelnet. That's okay. They all have to report their payment history to Department of Ed. And so that'll show up in your NSLDS file or the National Student Loan Data File. So you submit your employment certification form. So this might be, no need to consolidate. So your next step would be to submit the employment certification form. You would send that to Mohila, and that triggers Mohila to go and grab your loans and bring them over to them.
Right. I'm wondering if I want to put them on the spot here. Yeah, whatever. So in your experience, I know historically and just Fed loans is notoriously just, not had good reviews. Although I must say that in my experience, every time I've called them or contact support, I've had a somewhat decent experience. Certainly not a negative experience, but Mohila has also been around for a long time, working with loan servicers. Have they been easier to deal with, give better information in your experience? How does that process?
It's definitely gotten better. Yes, I think
Okay.
they've improved their processes. And actually, literally yesterday, they revamped the studentaid.gov website, so it's a lot more simple. Like if you click on public service loan forgiveness on studentaid.gov,
Yeah.
it takes you to the employment certification form. It's like really simple now, instead of like pelting you with information.
Yep.
So
That's exactly what I was going to say. That the website, at least, it's a bit easier to
yeah.
navigate. Another question that comes to mind, somebody wanted me to ask, was that, what happens to those that are already in training but then want to pursue further education even beyond the graduate degree, right? So you've got your doctorate, you've got your medical degree, but then a lot of folks are now pursuing an MBA while in training, in residency, fellowship, and then they need more student loans. Like, is there a cap, like at some point where you can't take more student loans out?
Not for graduate programs. The cap is just the cost of attendance. So you could be a forever student and always borrow and have the, you could borrow up to the cost of attendance, really. So in that case, what we recommend if someone's going back to school, the question is, are you still working full time? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. If they are, and they think they're going to be going to public service loan forgiveness, then there's a decision on if you want to keep your existing loans, like not for your current program, but for your old programs, if you want to keep them in repayment or not. And why you'd want to keep them in repayment is then they're continuing to go towards PSLF, because if you let them go into the in-school deferment, they can't be accumulating credit towards PSLF. But on the other end of that is the loans that you just borrowed for your new degree, they cannot go into repayment until you graduate from that degree. So you would have two different timelines towards PSLF. So another part of that discussion is that amount that you're borrowing right now small enough to where you could just pay that off to not extend your timeline towards PSLF? Or do you just want to keep all the loans in school deferment and go into repayment when you're totally done, when all of the payments can count towards PSLF and the whole balance could be on the same course? But does that make sense how I explain that?
It does, yeah. And I'm trying to think of an instance where somebody would want to go into deferment, especially when they're in training. Because that's the time that you want to max. Because again, as we spoke about last time, most residency programs tend to be 501c3 and do qualify, and you'd have the lowest payment. So, can you think of a situation where somebody would want to go to deferment? Obviously, if you can't afford it, but if you're working full time, as most trainees are, you'd still want to continue getting those 120 payments, right?
I think so. Some examples that come to mind for those who should go into deferment is someone who's clearly going to be going towards public service loan forgiveness, because you're going to add more loans to your loan profile, and you're adding a little more time if you're not making payments towards PSLF right now, but it makes more sense to have all the payments count for something or count towards the 120 and like the whole balance be going towards that timeline, versus putting yourself in repayment now, being done, let's say, in 8 years, and then getting yourself in repayment on the rest of the loans 2 years later and being in repayment for 2 more years. That's like a 12-year window of payments. So for someone who's clearly going to be doing public service loan forgiveness, it makes sense just to take advantage of the deferment, go into repayment when everything can count. But for those on the other side of that, on the flip side, is if someone's not sure that they're going to be doing PSLF long term, that's when I would probably suggest, well, go ahead and keep your loans in repayment now, because you could get to PSLF on the balance that you already had, and you'll have a remaining balance, but then, because you'll have one chunk forgiven sooner than the next chunk, but then you could decide, do I want to go private sector at this point, or... So at least you'll have something forgiven. So those are some of the conversations. That's a hard decision though, and it helps to just talk it through with what someone wants to do.
Yeah, and I'm also trying to think about it. That's a difficult calculation to do, because if it's like 6 months that you're giving off because essentially you're paying that 6 months of attending pay that you're going to calculate off of down the road.
Yeah.
And, what's the actual loan amount you're going to take out for a master's degree? It's not going to be the same. Hopefully, it's not going to be the same as a medical degree.
Yeah.
Although we'll talk about the cost of higher education a little bit later, as promised last time, but we didn't get to. But all right, so let's move on from loan forgiveness, because I think we've given its fair share of love here. But I want to talk a little bit about loan repayment strategies for the non-PSLF pursuer. Again, a lot of close friends who, as we maybe spoke about last time or offline at some point, that I'm a physiatrist, so one of the ways, some subspecialty places you can go to sports medicine, and you can do interventional pain management, spine, and most folks who end up going down that road for interventional pain and procedure heavy, they tend to make a lot more money. And rarely is it the case that they're not, again, the math that we usually do is like, okay, your student loan burden is at least 1.5x greater than your income. Maybe PSLF makes more sense. I know different people have different thresholds for that. But these folks tend to, again, because the average salary is a lot higher, for them, it usually makes sense to refinance. And so, how do you advise people to think about the loan repayment that take private practice jobs and don't want to pursue PSLF, or just it doesn't make sense to them because of financial reasons? Is it pay off aggressively? Is it a 20-year plan, 25-year, whatever it is? What's the conversation like?
Yeah, I think so. I think early on, if we're talking to someone who's about to go into training, or they are still in training, but they clearly know they're going to be going private sector route, then the thought process then is, okay, well, how can we reduce your cost now? Like, what are the easiest ways we can reduce the cost of your repayment now? And oftentimes those who are going private sector, they still can't throw a ton of money towards the loans in residency or in training. So we talk about repay and the benefits of the repay subsidy, or the interest discount that plan has, because repay, what it does is it allows you to pay based off of your income. So if you're in residency, that payment would be proportionate, of course, to your residency salary. And then that payment, we know, is not going to cover interest if your balance is still pretty large. So you're making a payment, it's probably going all to interest, but you're still probably not paying off all the interest that's charged that month. So in a normal world, that would mean your balance is growing at whatever you didn't pay. But repay, what it does is it will waive half of that accruing interest. So the balance will still be growing while you're in residency or fellowship or training, but it'll be growing a lot slower than it could be, definitely than it could be if you just put the loans into deferment or forbearance while you were in training, because then it's growing at 100% of what your interest cost is, instead of maybe like half or a little more than half. So that's a strategy we use early on, take advantage of repays subsidy early on to just reduce the interest cost or interest growth over time. Then when they get into training or into attending, that higher income starts coming in. That's when you can pull the trigger on maybe looking into refinancing. And refinancing is a permanent decision, so we always talk about it carefully, because once you leave the federal system, you cannot come back. But if someone who's going private practice knows that they're going to stay that direction, that's okay, because then the game plan might be to pay it down to zero. And refinancing is the only way you can reduce your interest rate once you no longer have the repay subsidy. The repay subsidy kind of acts like you have a reduced interest rate by how much it charges. But in the attending world, refinancing is the only way you can reduce that rate. So we recommend you going that direction. And should you be super aggressive? I think that depends on the goals that you have and what interest rate you get. Because if you refinance and you get a 3% interest rate, there's not really an incentive to throw a ton of money towards that loan anymore, when you could be making, 7, 8, 9% investing or putting money towards your retirement, because then you're missing out on, even though that debt is costing you 3%, you're missing out on potentially 5, 6, 7% of growth. So those are sometimes the conversations.
Yeah, even better paying off credit card debt, which is like 20%.
Yes. Yeah, prioritize
right?
other higher debt first, but if you have 3% as your interest rate.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so you brought up the interest rate, and I think that raises the question. The Fed just, I think, raised last week or the week before, and at least we were just in the kind of the real estate market, and I'm hearing like now interest rates are in the 6%. And I imagine for student loans, it's maybe not as high, but what kind of interest rates are you seeing right now? And, how is that changing that conversation for you?
Yeah, that's a great point. Inflation has definitely impacted any debt interest rate. It's positively impacted like high yield savings accounts though. Like people have been happy about seeing those go back up. But we have seen an impact in the refinancing space. So some company, we actually had one situation 2 days ago where a physician who had really great credit, great income, was looking to refinance, pretty good debt to income ratio, but looking into refinancing, gearing up for 2023. And he got offered a 6% interest rate. And that to us is high because we were seeing like 3%, 2.5% like a year ago. So it has definitely taken a hit. We think, as inflation starts to chill out a bit, we think things could also climb their way back down. And when interest rates kick back in with federal loans, these private student loan companies are going to have more of an incentive to be competitive because right now there's no competition with the federal loan interest rates. It's at 0%. So, these private companies, they've probably been hurting. Some of them have been combining or, absorbing each other. But there are still a lot of them out there. There will always be a lot of them out there. But when interest rates get turned back on, they have an incentive to look attractive for people to then start refinancing again. Because if your federal interest rate is 6.5% or 7%, the attraction there is to get a lower interest rate to get your business. So I think there's some checks and balances there too that we'll see in 2023. But rates are not great right now. That is true.
So, with that, what are some resources where you point people to when you're suggesting that they shop around for getting the best possible rates, even given this market and what we talked about before?
Yep. So I do think studentloanplanner.com is a good resource. We track I think almost all of the big jumbo companies that are out there right now. The two that are brokers, there is Credible and Splash. Those two companies are what's called brokers, which they will shop up to 10 to 12 different companies to include also credit unions in your local area. So those are definitely worth a shot because it casts a really wide net. And then you could, of course, shop as many as you want. But really what you're doing is you're just trying to shop for the best rate.
Awesome. So yeah, and we'll link all that, especially the SLP website that you recommended, because I do think that this has been a wealth of resource. And I know that, just as I mentioned at the outset, just because of people asking to have you come on, they're going to benefit from all the awesome content you guys are putting out there.
Yeah.
All right. So I know we just have a couple moments left here, but I want to spend some time talking about building wealth, because if people go back to the archives, you started out talking about how your career really started as a financial coach. And it wasn't until later when you realized that every single person, I think you said with the exception of one, who didn't have student loans in the conversation. And it was a significant piece of the puzzle. And so, we spent a few hours talking about this, but, we often, and myself included, right? My financial education journey started because of the anxiety of student loans. And sometimes, I think we have to figure out, hey, what are we going to attack first? And for some people, the student loan burden is a bigger part of the puzzle. Others, it's smaller. And so before we talk about some strategies of how we can continue building wealth with the context of student loan in the back of our mind, maybe let's define some roles, because you did a recent podcast on this, and I only just recently came to learn about how a financial coach is different than a planner, than an advisor, than I love how you call them. Oh, who did you do that with? Who was your colleague with you on that one,
that was Sim on our team.
I love that you called them sales representatives or something of that nature, and it's a clear distinction. And so I'll let you take that away and define some of those terms so people understand like what's the role of each of these folks.
Yeah, so I think so I'll start with coaching because I think that's in my realm. So coaching is what I do. A financial coach, there's no license for this. So that's one thing to know. And that's also something to be careful about when you're looking for someone to work with. But a coach It is a up and coming niche in financial planning, or like a practice area in financial planning, I would say. And coaching, I think, is designed for people who are not quite ready for the big, complicated tax planning strategies, retirement planning strategies, investment strategies. Like those are, of course, going to be important one day, but these, I think the basics are what a coach is helpful in helping someone establish for themselves. So a budget could be student loans, paying down other kinds of debt, um, really getting a handle on, just the cash flow that's coming in, what's going out, emergency savings, starting to save. I think that's a big part of what my job is too as a coach is I want to start building those habits now, because it is so hard to grow into a nice big income in the future without saving, and then have to like whittle yourself back down into like forcing
Hmm.
yourself to save again. And so my a big goal in my process is, let's get these things, these basics done right. Let's get the habits established so you can grow from here. And then folks graduate from me and start working with investment advisors or certified financial planners is what I typically recommend. So I think the coach, in summary, is for the basics, getting the
Hmm.
foundation of your plan in place. Um, a certified financial planner is who I recommend folks work with if they want to do some more retirement planning, investment planning, really comprehensive financial planning. They're kind of the doctors in the financial planning space. It's a well-known designation, CFP. We also recommend going for a fee-only advisor or a fee-only CFP, because that means that they only charge a fee for their services. And that can be either a flat fee, like, X amount for working with them for the year, or it can be a flat percentage off of assets. So if they manage assets for you or investments for you, it can be just one percentage off of whatever you have invested with them. So that there's two different ways to do that, but it keeps the compensation question, or the compensation easy, in the sense of there's no question as to if they're getting compensated to recommend something to you, such as a product or a service.
I want to jump in right there,
Yeah.
actually. So as I mentioned, I think I started off learning about, so it was that month after medical school, so 2017, June, and I just somehow landed on White Coat Investor, and I went down this rabbit hole, and then
Mm-hmm.
I was just addicted. And since then, I think that's kind of been the basis of learning all my financial education to
Mm-hmm.
start off with, right before, or just like the steep learning curve that you have. So the intro to financial education with White Coat Investor, Ryan Inman, you guys obviously, Ben White from Student Loans, Mr. Money Mustache, all these guys, that
Mm-hmm.
the blog Passive Income MD that I think about, and time again, what the consensus amongst all these folk is exactly what you mentioned. Go for a fee only.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about this a lot, though.
Yeah.
Just because somebody is fee based or
Mm-hmm.
does like an AUM model or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean they're gonna, like, for lack of a better word, honor those disclosures, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just there's a
Yeah.
potential for conflict, but I think you might have mentioned this before. There are a lot of great people who work under that model, but will give good advice, non-biased advice,
Yep.
right? Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yep.
So then the question becomes is, how does one figure that out? That you have somebody who potentially has a conflict, but
Mm-hmm.
that's a good professional in that regard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there questions? Are there tactics?
I think there are questions, and I think all of this to say too, like, interview the person that you want to work with, or interview a few people, just like a job. Like, you want to interview the person that you're going to let handle your money or help with these money conversations. You want to make sure you're jiving with them personality wise, that you like their process. So that's important. But some really key questions to ask is the compensate. That's the easiest question. How are you compensated? And you can follow that up with, are there any conflicts of interest? Which they could provide you like a more formal disclosure on these things, but are there any conflicts of interest and how you're compensated? And what you're looking for with that question is, if they, for example, if they make a recommendation for life insurance, are they going to get compensated on whether or not you implement that life insurance? Is there an incentive of some kind for them to upsell you Instead of, I think whole life insurance gets a horrible rep in the financial planning space. Are they going to sell you whole life or term when you really just need the life insurance coverage? So asking those questions, I think asking just anything about their process is helpful. But being a CFP or being fee only, you're exactly right, doesn't always mean that you're always going to serve it, that person in a fiduciary capacity, because the CFP designation does obligate that individual or that professional to have a fiduciary standard when they're working with you. So that, I think that is important with the CFP, is that they are required to act in that capacity. If not, they lose their licensure. And that's similar to in the medical space too, right? Like y'all don't?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're required to.
Yeah.
But so I guess the follow-up question naturally would be, is there like a reporting process? If somebody feels quote unquote wronged in that, say, hey, that my financial planner, in this instance, there was a conflict of interest, wasn't disclosed, or whatever the reasons is, and I don't think they acted in my best interest. Like, is there a reporting process? Can you report to an agency, or like, how does that work?
You can. So
we're not encouraging anything, but I'm just asking.
Yeah, for sure. So you can report it to their firm. You can report it to the CFP board, and there is a process that individual would go through for some kind of resolution. And there would be some kind of review that would have to happen. And the question is, do they keep their license or not based on that complaint? So there is a process.
But I'm willing to bet, though, it's going to be harder, because anytime you sign up with somebody, they're making you sign a million things. And I'm sure in the fine print that all the disclosures are listed there. And rarely do people end up reading all those things, because, again, as we've talked about before, they're just written in jargon that we're not trained to interpret at all. But the reason I was thinking about this, because, as you might know, we spend a lot of time talking about topics related to other aspects of physical and emotional health, and especially nutrition, right? We spend a lot of energy and time talking about that, and it's just a highly contested and debated topic on social media and really anywhere. And one of the things the opponents of things that are not pharmaceutical based, so supplementation and that kind of stuff, they'll say, okay, well, you have to look at the disclosures, and the authors of the study are doing research, but they're funded by XYZ food company, or they're funded by this supplement company. And I think about that, again, this is kind of a little tangential, but, these things they're not getting NIH funding. They're not getting funding from large academic institutions. There isn't an incentive to study these things. And that's what makes it challenging. So, a previous guest, Dr. Sean Arndt, came and talked about how it's more important for us to look at the methods and rather than, who funded the study. I mean, that's the biases should be acknowledged, should be appreciated. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, if this analogy is making sense, that transparency is critical, right? And so if you ask that question, if I ask that question next time I have a conversation, and I ask somebody, hey, how do you get paid? And I get to some roundabout answer and something like really complex that I cannot understand straightforward. And I think I'm somewhat of a smart person. Then that's a red flag to me. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from you as well.
I think transparency is definitely the right word. And I think you're exactly right. Like, if something can't be explained very simply, that is a red flag, and that deserves a little more investigation, or you moving elsewhere.
Yeah. Which is what's awesome about the fee only model, right? It's like, this is the hourly rate, this is the yearly rate, this is the monthly rate subscription, whatever model people just decide to go by. I want to go back to the coaching aspect. I love that, because it does start at there's the whole aspect of, personal finances, the behavioral aspect, right? That's the budgeting. You talked about buzzwords, right? Budgeting, saving, all these things that are extremely challenging, especially when we go from residency and all of a sudden you've 3x or 4x or 5x your income, and you've delayed gratification. Those two words, right? You hear that throughout the training for so long, and you want to live a little more of a lavish lifestyle. And I mentioned Ryan Inman before. He kind of talks about give yourself a 50% raise. Like, so if you're making $50,000, spend $75,000 next year. Right. But then there's the other side of the coin there, like live like a resident for 5 years after residency, right? Pay off that debt. And so, I mean, all these movements, you've got FIRE, you've got fat FIRE, you've got all that kind of stuff. So, speaking about tactics, are there budgeting apps or techniques that you'd like to people to really hone in on their finance and tracking, that kind of stuff? What do you like to use?
Ooh, that's a great question. So there's a lot of free apps out there. Like
Hmm.
mint.com is for free. I use that to just pull a lot of my personal data together. Um,
They're a little clunky though.
they are clunky. It's also reactive in the sense
Hmm.
that it can only gather, and a lot of budgeting apps are going to be like that. Like they can only gather the information that's happened in the past. They're supposed to have those things, and there's a couple like features of Mint where you can create budgets, but it is clunky. It is also free. But
Yeah, you get what you pay for, I suppose.
yep. I like You Need a Budget, or YNAB,
One app, yeah.
YNAB. That's a great one too. You are treated as the CFO of your household, which I love. We actually had a podcast episode on YNAB with the founder, which I thought was pretty cool, on Student Loan Planners podcast.
Awesome.
Um, so that's a good one. I think the awareness is a big part of the budgeting conversation. Almost always, when I ask folks to collect their numbers on how much they've spent on average, like over the past couple of months on certain areas, like almost always it's, oh my gosh, I did not realize how much I was spending in that area.
Mm,
Or, and there's certain areas that are naturally going to be higher. There are some common areas that are just higher, maybe when you're younger, or when you're going through residency, or when you have children. There's just categories fluctuate over time, but the awareness is important. And also,
hmm.
starting to understand the flow. Like, are you overspending? Are you spending above your means? Are there some areas that you can cut or reduce? So the awareness and the behavior around like why we spend our money on certain things is really important as part of the coaching process.
Yeah. What do you use personally? Mint?
I use Mint, but I actually have, so similar to how I work with my clients, I have a Google Sheet that I use
Mm,
personally. So
old school.
I know it is old school, but it works for me.
Yeah,
And I think that's budgeting has to work for you. Like it can't be too
absolutely.
complicated. So,
Yeah, no, much like anything else. Yeah, we used to use YNAB, and what I loved
mm,
about it is just the actual app on our iPhone was really nice, and
hmm
but there is a steeper learning curve though. Like you have to
yeah,
kind of get used to the way that because it's this concept of zero cost budgeting or something they call it,
yeah,
where every dollar is assigned a job. So we might end up going back to we're doing Mint right now, but anyways,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
not what
that's
this is
why you
about.
said it was clunky. You're like,
Yeah,
I've got to
yeah, I
beef with
just
it.
So other things that you talked about, kind of the investing piece of it. When you first start working with a client, so setting the behavioral aspect,
hmm
do you use some type of like a risk assessment, like or an investor profile questionnaire, or is that more of the financial planner aspect when they're going to be starting to work with numbers?
That is more of the financial planner aspect. So the risk tolerance
Hmm.
questionnaires, the starting to really fine tune the investment strategy. That's when you graduate from a coaching program. But we start to get the habit of saving and investing during the early stages. So, definitely getting the match, like starting to invest with your employer 401k. I encourage a lot of my clients to start maxing out their 401ks as soon as they can, because a lot of the folks I work with have student loans. They're going towards loan forgiveness. So the more they put in pre-tax buckets, the better for their student loan payments. So we talk about that. We talk about how getting that habit early on is great, because then they just don't think about it in the future. Like it's already not part of their budget, and they've set themselves up nicely to save really early and often, which is key. So that's about the extent that I get into coaching, is just getting the habit established now, starting to put some numbers to things, but the investment strategy comes
How
later.
how does someone become like or qualify, or how do you determine that somebody is fit to graduate from coaching and moving on to a financial planner?
hmm I would say I've had a lot of really fun like graduates recently that I get really excited about thinking about. So I think it's time for someone to graduate from coaching when they're pretty spot on with their spending. Like they don't have. Let me maybe back up and rephrase that. They're really on par with where their money's going on a month-to-month basis. They're checking off their goals each and every month. So if they had a goal to put X amount in savings for their house down payment, or
Mm-hmm.
do XYZ, like they're checking their boxes for their goals every single month or pretty close to it. Everyone's not perfect. It's not going to happen every month, but they're pretty darn close to every month. And they're starting to, I think also the interest in starting to learn a little bit more about investing.
Yeah.
That's important to me to know that they're ready for those conversations. So I think some of those things, like checking the boxes for the goals that they've already set, being on track with where they are finding, like where we thought they were going to be based on our planning, and then the interest in starting to take the next step.
Yeah. I imagine there are some times where they're still continuing to work with you, but also using the services of a financial planner simultaneously.
Yep. Yeah. So it's very common where someone will graduate from coaching, but still need help with student loan stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that
Right.
that changes all the time. So,
Yeah. Where do you stand on emergency funds?
ooh, so for my coaching clients, I pretty standardly want folks to build up a 3 month emergency savings. Three to 6 months. Usually it's 3 months. I don't work with a lot of entrepreneurs or folks that have very variable income. So I think 6 months is a great bucket for those that have very unexpected income or life circumstances. But 3 months I think is perfect. I think it also shows the grit for them to get there, like the determination for them to get to that number.
Mm-hmm.
Do they keep it at 3 months always? Maybe not. If they're very responsible with their money, there's other goals that we're working towards. Maybe, we relax the emergency savings a little bit. Maybe we have that in a different bucket, like a higher yield savings or like a brokerage account of some kind. But that's where I'm at right now. It depends on the person, but generally 3 months.
There's some folks who may argue that, again, as I mentioned, we come out with so much debt, and often because our training can be anywhere from 7 to 12, 13 years, depending on what kind of program you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Our colleagues that we graduated, I mean, they have this head start, and we know that time in the market beats timing the market all the time, right? I mean, you kind of mentioned that's why it's important to start saving early, like very early investing, because
Yeah.
compound interest is a powerful thing. And so just when we're trainees, there's a thought that maybe you could put it in the Roth because you'll qualify for it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit easier to pull that money out. So using that as an emergency fund.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that?
I've definitely heard this approach. Do I like it? No, because it is a little more complicated to get that money out. It's not as easy as moving it from one savings account to your checking, or even a high
Mm-hmm.
yield savings to checking. So it's not as instant, which might be good if someone is testing if it's really an emergency, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but I could see the arguments for putting it in a Roth because it is accessible. There are still some rules around like having the account open for at least 5 years.
Right.
So there's some things that you have to pay attention to there. But I could see someone who gets frustrated with money just sitting in savings, wanting to use that Roth approach. But that might be for someone who's already graduated from coaching. And that's a good place
Yeah.
to be in.
Love that. So, speaking of the Roth, you did mention maximizing the pre-tax accounts so we can reduce that AGI, we can reduce the student loan payments, right? That's kind of what we talked about last time as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this age-old debate, and I do have to get your take
Yeah.
for Roth versus pre-tax, especially, and I want to get it in the lens of somebody who's just graduated. This is a little selfish because this is me. Somebody who just graduated from training, and or they're going into the attendinghood. So it's a half a year, and they still qualify for both, but always keeping the student loan part in the back of our mind.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach that conversation?
Yeah. So I think I do, when it comes to student loan planning, like in the back of my mind, we have the conversation about pre-tax buckets like 403B, 401k, because it reduces adjusted gross income. It reduces your tax bill today too. So, for student loan planning purposes, if you're trying to go for the lowest payment, then pre-tax is the way to go. If you're someone who's, going into private, well, and, there's also the conversation of what do you think taxes are going to do by the time you get to retirement? And no one knows that. I am on the stance of I think you should have money in both buckets. At some point you should have money in Roth, money in pre-tax, because that gives you options in retirement where if the tax environment when you go to retire is, taxes are on sale, great. Pull from your pre-tax accounts. You haven't paid taxes on that yet. If taxes are in a really low environment when you go to retire, then you can use those assets first. If
What does that mean? Taxes are on sale. What does that mean?
As in like if tax brackets and general income tax is low,
Okay.
if we're in a really, like, for example, like in the 60s, 70s, we were in a horrible tax environment. Income taxes were up to 70%. And so if you went to retire and you had a bunch of 401k pre-tax money, like you're being taxed quite a bit once you go to retire on that money. So Roth money in the 70s would have been great because you were already taxed on it, maybe in a lower tax environment. Of course, that's a really aggressive example. That was probably a really horrible economic time for our nation. But, having options in retirement is key. And so I think having money in both is good. So you have the option and the discretion to choose which buckets to pull from and when.
Yeah. And I think this last couple of minutes that we talked about, and really just the last couple of hours that we've had a conversation with, it just gives people a sense of how complicated this can be.
Oh, yeah.
Just the student loans by itself, but then when you look at it in the global picture of financial health, right? And we look at about investing and doing the calculations of, first of all, we don't know what 20 years, 30 years from now, or 40 years from now, when one's going to retire, what the tax market's going to look like, or taxes, what bracket you're going to be in, but also how does that affect your student loans? Is it more financially beneficial to go ahead and maximize one account versus another? And so that's exactly why I think there's a lot of utility to not bury our head in the sand, educate ourselves financially, as Ryan and Inman previously came back and talked about. But if not, if this doesn't interest, healthcare practitioners, then they do have to go out and outsource and hire somebody who's doing it the right way. You guys are clearly one of those folks. But there are a lot of other great professionals out there, and I'll find some of those people that I think, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some, and link that in here. I do want to get give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your pre-debt coaching or counseling that you guys call, because I heard you talk about, maybe it was with Lauren or somebody else, about, like, one of the listeners who was asking about whether or not they should get married because their fiance had like a really large debt burden, and how confusing that was. And I mean, those type of horrifying stories student loans should not dictate that, right? And so that's like the negative aspect of it. And the other thing is, Travis recently had somebody on the podcast where this person was a teacher, I think, and she had like the income of 70,000, but was able to get like 80,000 of debt. And at that point, he said, there's a loophole. You might be able to take out all that they're offering you, because if you're going to go for loan forgiveness, at that point, the marginal cost of dollar is zero for you, because it's going to get forgiven anyway. And he mentioned that that's something you guys discuss in your pre-debt counseling as well. So what's that program about? How did it start, and like who should consider it?
Yeah, you are awesome. You're SLP fan. you're a true fan. I really appreciate it. But yes, we do have a pre-debt consultation. So this came about a little later. Our bread and butter has always been student loan repayment planning. That's the majority of our work still. Most people come to us after they already have the debt, but pre-debt planning has become more and more important. Really, because school is not getting cheaper. And I think I'm glad there's starting to be more conversation about the value of school and the cost of programs and comparing those things. So our pre-debt consultation helps people take a look at, if they're going to school for being a veterinarian, for example, what is the estimated cost based on the school that they're going towards are going to. And usually they have these numbers handy because they're looking at these opportunities already. So we look at the cost of attendance. We look at the potential income opportunity in the future for what area they want to go into. which this is all using assumptions, but I think we can make some pretty educated assumptions on that. And then we take a look at, okay, so if you were to borrow the full cost of attendance, what does this look like when it comes to repayment? And, we walk through, should someone go the forgiveness path, like PSLF or longer term forgiveness, or is this path going to take you more towards like a pay it down to zero approach with your student loans? And we just kind of have those conversations. And that was a good example with Travis's conversation about, borrowing the most that you have access to, which sounds like really scary and irresponsible to say, hey, just borrow everything that they give you. But there does become a point where it just doesn't matter how much you borrow, because if you're going to be going towards loan forgiveness, your payments are based off of income. And so if you borrowed 200,000 and get 100 forgiven, but you pay based off of income over that timeline, so it doesn't really make a difference, if that makes sense. So we have those conversations really to help just paint the picture instead of going into school blind, worrying about the money side of things, thinking that you're going to have to graduate and sacrifice everything to pay the loans off within 10 years. Like, that doesn't have to be the approach, and we just use math to try to figure out how you should be thinking about your schooling, and if that to you or to that person makes sense, and or it if that sits well with them. Like, if they are a forgiveness case, are they okay with having the loans around for 20 years, 25 years to go towards the income driven path? Or are they okay with committing to public service? So those are some of the things that we weigh and we talk about in that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's an awesome resource. It's a thoughtful approach. I think, as we've highlighted multiple times, I mean, these decisions, if you make the wrong one off the start, it can be thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, depending on, what plan, if you're in the wrong plan or whatnot. I know I mentioned that we're going to wrap up here, but I do want to, do you have a couple more minutes? Are you game? I want to talk about the cost of higher education.
Sure.
Awesome. So I think part of the reason we're even sitting down here and we're in this mess in the first place is because the cost of higher education, graduate programs, just exponentially has been rising over the past couple of years. And it doesn't seem like there is an end near, right? I've got a baby daughter now, and, I start thinking about the 529 and whatnot, because I need to start, saving for her college. And I was just I pulled up some rough numbers here, and, I'm in the state of New Jersey. That's where I went to undergrad. And just the data for the state tuition since 1990 to 2008, the average in-state tuition has tripled. And this is for the state schools. Then I looked at some of the medical schools, my medical school in particular. I matriculated in 2013, so coming up on a decade. And a decade later, the tuition, just the tuition in itself, is $20,000 more. And what particularly, and that's just one example, right? I imagine some of the schools out on the West Coast in California, and particularly in Southern California, that's got to be twice as much as that. But what's particularly frustrating to me about that, specifically medical school in general, is that third and fourth years are being charged the same amount of tuition. And I don't know how familiar you are with what kind of happens during the third and fourth clerkship years, as we call them, when they're doing rotations, especially fourth year, when most of the students end up doing their rotations at outside institutions, outside hospitals. We call them audition rotations or sub-internships, where they're trying to, really shine for their program. And so for like 7 to 9 months out of the year, they have no connection with their home institution, yet they're being charged anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000. And that's just like, it makes no sense to me. So all that being said, why is this happening? Tell us.
Why is it happening? Well, because it can. In the sense of there is no limit on how much you can borrow when it comes to federal direct loans, because the Department of Education has given schools the ability to dictate their own, well, they can dictate their own cost of attendance, and you can borrow federal student loans up to the cost of attendance. So if, that third and fourth year, the college tells Department of Ed, hey, it costs 60, 70,000 for my third and fourth year folks going through this program. You can borrow that. If it was 30,000, you could borrow up to 30,000. If it was 100,000, you can borrow up to 100,000. So the schools have figured it out. and I may have said something similar to this when we talked about it last time, but the schools have figured out that they have no incentive to keep the costs of school down because they know that forgiveness exists with student loans for those who don't make enough post-graduation to pay the loans off. And that, is now getting some attention because we're now getting to a point where forgiveness is definitely part of the conversation, but we also haven't gotten to the point yet where mass income driven forgiveness has like timed out, meaning 25 years. This all started early, or let's say 2007, when some of these income driven plans started coming out. So people haven't gotten to 20 or 25 years yet of loan forgiveness based on these current plans. So it's not, I think there's going to be a bigger blowback on these, on the cost of attendance conversation when people see it, like when people see how much student loans are getting forgiven after 20 or 25 years. But right now it's kind of like it's a fake number. It's a not fake conversation because it's real. It exists. It'll happen, right. But no one's actually seen the forgiveness yet. And so, I think, in summary, I think schools just don't have any incentive to keep the cost down, and they could borrow, they can dictate what it is.
So, and yeah, I think just to put some numbers on it, I mean, we're talking currently, even though you mentioned that really it's the 10-year program, folks that have gone through that program, we're talking in the upwards of several billions of dollars, right? I can't remember exactly what I heard. Are we talking in the tens of billions, or is it much more than that the current forgiveness has been? Do you have a sense of what it is off the top of your head?
So I think 145 billion was estimated. Yeah, so estimated 145, but we're not there yet. I think we're climbing towards that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess if the more important question is how does it stop, kind of what I'm hearing from you is when that bill gets to be large enough and enough people actually do get forgiven. And we talked about it is here to stay, despite what the headlines have said 4 or 5 years ago, like it's going to happen. Yeah. And when, several $100 billion get forgiven, Department of Ed's going to realize, oh, hey, this is not a bad idea. This is not a good idea. Yeah. And we don't want to get rid of PSLF. Maybe they will. They keep talking about restructuring it over and over and over again, depending on which party's in command. But the other way to look at it is maybe we reduce the cost of education. I mean, are you more optimistic about that?
I think there will be some. So it's tricky because does government or are there going to be limits on how much a school is a business can charge for their services? Like that's a really tricky conversation. So, maybe there's some kind of, I think what might happen first is more accountability on the schools where they have more skin in the game for people who get loan forgiveness. Like if they have put their students in a position where they had to go towards loan forgiveness and they get X amount forgiven, well, maybe the college picks up, half of that bill or something. This is just like me rambling, but, I think more things like that would happen first than dictating or putting caps on how much the cost for school can be, because then that really leads us down a slippery slope to putting constraints on what businesses can do. And that's probably not a good place to go to.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly not going to get to the bottom of it today. I don't think anybody really knows, but I do want to give people something to think about, and I wanted to open up that conversation because I do think that's a serious problem, and it's somewhat of a frustrating problem. And we always talk about getting to the root cause, right? And I think that this is certainly one of them. Meagan, I want to thank you again for sitting down with us and talking student loans, taking a deep dive. And also I'm glad that we got to touch on a little bit about financial coaching and financial health in general, because I think as much energy as we spend talking about student loans, and it's important, it's forefront of everybody's mind, overall this is a big part of the financial plan and financial health as we talked about last time. So thanks so much, and can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine Redefined. As promised, if you'd like to dive further into any of the topics we discussed today, please be sure to check out the show notes, where you have a lot of great resources to learn more about student loans, but also personal finance and financial health, with a focus on healthcare practitioners. As always, please remember that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only, and it does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice or financial advice of any sort. No physician or client-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician, your personal financial planner, your financial coach, like Megan, for any health or financial related advice. I cannot stress the importance of working with a good financial professional if you don't have the interest yourself to educate and learn about these somewhat complex, if not highly complex topics, especially when it comes to the student loan landscape, which is constantly changing and constantly evolving. However, if you enjoyed this show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value. And as always, we are happy to hear feedback. You can reach us at medredefined@gmail.com, or on social media. Our handle is medredefined on all the usual suspects. So please be sure to reach out. And until next time, thank you for listening.